Good rhythm and a strong sense of timing really does make all the difference to your playing, making it sound much better, more musical, and, well, less beginnery. If you think that you just don't have good rhythm, it's better than you think it is. Right now, it's just hard to realise it on the piano, but it can be worked on and improved, which is why I've got these tips to help you get there. And all these tips are meant to kind of come together and build on each other, so watch them all through to get the most out of it. Okay, so the most important first step is that simply you just need to pay more specific attention to the rhythm and have run-throughs of whatever you're learning where the rhythm, playing it accurately and keeping the timing even is your main goal. At first, you're probably playing through something, but the rhythm's off, there's hesitations, stopping and starting, or speeding up and slowing down for difficult bits. Let me know in the comments if you find yourself doing that, but sometimes we don't even realise we're doing it. We're so preoccupied with just hitting the right notes. And that's actually okay in the first phase when you're just getting familiar with something new. But we mustn't get stuck in that phase. So once you are starting to get familiar with something, and slowly at first, we need to purposefully focus on good rhythm. And people often forget to do that. At first, trying any of these tips with small sections at a time is going to help you get the best results. Really importantly, we need to have any rhythm we want to play in our head first, know what it sounds like just in a more natural way without overthinking it before we can play it on the piano. That can then act as like a good guide or a framework to map the right notes onto. And a much easier way to get that rhythm in our head, to get it internalized and get a connection to it before we have to worry about the notes and the technique and stuff, is to vocalize it. First, let me tell you that you have much better timing and rhythm naturally than you think you do. We all sing along to our favourite songs, and when we do that, we're completely naturally mimicking what can often be quite complex rhythms really easily. Humans are pretty rhythmic anyway. There's a lot of rhythm in just the way we speak, in the cadences of our sentences, and just in individual words. And your sense of even timing is there as well. If you count to 5, you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've never heard anyone go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The point is, if it's easier for us to get a rhythm in our head using our voice to begin with, then we can use that to our advantage to help guide what we're trying to play on piano. If I was having trouble with the rhythm playing this, I need to get the overall sound of the rhythm stuck in my head first, the rhythm that the hands make together. I can vocalize it or maybe clap as well. Da-dum, dum, da-da-dum, da-dum, dum, da-da-dum. Then use that to guide your hands. Da-dum, dum, da-da-dum, da-dum, dum, da-da-dum. Maybe it's just a right hand melody. The rhythm's really important to the sound of that, so I want to have it naturally. Ba-ba-ba-da-ba. Da-da-da-da-da. That's going to help you get the general rhythm and timing of what you're playing, and especially with anything more complicated. But it also really helps with the smaller details, the accenting of certain notes, the articulation and the feel, which is a really important part of the sound of the rhythm. You're going to find that more naturally with your voice, and then that can help you translate it to the keys. It helps you get that sense of musicality out in your playing. I had a student this week who was learning a riff, but he was rushing the end like this. That last note he was really rushing, so I got him to sing it, ba ba da 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 da, and then it completely smoothed it out. And I have another student who's been learning Yellow Brick Road, and he was learning the pre-chorus, but he'd misremembered the pattern slightly. He was playing this, but he was meant to do it like this. Slightly different feel, but he remembered it by singing it. Da 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 at the end. Similarly to the last tip, sometimes it might be helpful for you to put an actual sentence to the rhythm to help you get the sound of it in your head or memorize it. Short, quicker rhythms can be tricky, but you're already an expert at saying words, so we can use that. So that last little bit might be quite tricky, and aside from the technical stuff to be able to play that, you need to have the sound of that in your head first to kind of pull it off with a good feel. It might be hard to get it in your head though, so if you say something like sugary tea, because you can say sugary tea easily and quickly, sugary tea, and then just map that onto this. Sugary tea. Da ga da da. Sugary tea. Then you can work on speeding it up. Little bit of a silly tip. I learned that one from a drummer actually, but it can be helpful sometimes. It's also really important to actually understand how rhythm works. And essentially, being able to picture rhythm is going to make it much clearer in our head where to place those notes in time and be much more precise about it. We can visualize this in a couple of really good ways. So the first is actually just learning how to read written notation. And even if you're not wanting to fully learn to read properly, learning the basics of rhythm notation is going to be super helpful. And all the basic terminology like quarter notes, eighth notes and all that stuff, we use that anyway whether we're reading or not. But I can also show you the basic idea quite easily in a DAW. Here we can see 4 beats evenly spaced out, representing how they're evenly spaced out in time. And these are quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. That even grid to work against helps us see where to place notes when we use longer notes or leave some of the beats out. Like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And when we divide the space in between the beats, we can picture that too. The next way would be to split each beat into 2, go exactly halfway between the beat. And then we'd have a grid of eighth notes like this. I'll slow the tempo for this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And again, when we create rhythms that uses some eighth notes, we can literally see on the grid where everything should be placed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And we can do this for other rhythms too that might use something like 16th notes or triplets. And we just divide the beat in different ways. Once you're comfortable understanding the even grid and all these possible points you could use, then it becomes much easier to learn new rhythms really quickly by just placing things where you want. In a more natural way, we also just want to feel a strong sense of the beat as our backbone and feel what the relationship between the beat is and the notes that you play. So here, when the notes land on the beat, when they connect with it, and when they fall somewhere in between it. Just like the cadence in a sentence, when you emphasize certain words, you want to feel when you're playing a melody, which notes kind of feel emphasized when they connect to the beat. So a simple example might be this. So we started with the beat, with, in between, with, in between, with. Again, tapping the beat or vocalizing or singing that is a good way to practice. Bum, 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 ba, da, dum, dum, dum. But in general, singing or rap music is perfect for this, or even just saying stuff whilst you tap on your knees or your hands or your foot, a consistent pulse, is a really good way to get into this without having to actually think about notes or anything. It's just giving yourself less to think about so you can focus on practicing the rhythm. We're really trying to get our understanding and our visualization of the rhythm and that rhythm grid internalized so it comes out more naturally. I know that sounds hard at the moment, but with enough experience, these things do come together. A slightly harder melody example might be this. So we had a few notes there that popped out in between the beat. And so far we've just been using eighth notes. So if we think of the beat as quarter notes, and then going in between the beat would be eighth notes. They're twice as fast. Of course, when you get there, you can do this with 16th notes and other things too. I'll do that slower and try and keep track of which notes land with the beat and which ones go in between. Sometimes, however, for things like that, it's really useful for us to feel the smaller division, the smallest division for what you're using. So there, instead of feeling the beat, which is one way of practicing it, it might be helpful as well to practice feeling the subdivisions, the eighth notes. But you want to be kind of hearing those subdivisions in your head as that grid, that framework to go against. So you want to be hearing da 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 in your head. Da 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 da. And it's going to help you place those notes in the right place. A level up to that last point then is to actually count aloud whilst you play. This will be tricky at first to do, but it can be practiced when you start really slow and simple. But counting really has improved my awareness and confidence of rhythm and time, and it helps you keep track of where in the bar you are as well, so you don't get lost. So you always know I'm in between beat 3 and 4, for example. Remember, it's always especially important to keep track of and feel where beat 1 is to orient yourself. Minuet is a good example again, which is in 3/4, so I'm going to be counting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Again, feeling where those notes go on and in between the beat. But you can also try counting the subdivisions. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 you don't have to do this over really complicated things for a while. Just start really simple with things that only land on the beat. Like, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't count over everything I do, but I would just make it a fairly regular part of my practice process. So when I'm learning something, you can try it on a section of a piece or with your exercises that you're working on. Copying is a really important part of learning music. So playing along with other music and mimicking other musicians is a really good way to practice rhythm a little bit more intuitively. You can play along to a whole song to try and keep up with it, or even just work on a single section or an individual phrase. And this is helpful to try and get a sense of musicality in the way that you perform rhythm, into the feel of it, into the tiny details in the articulation and things like that. But also if you're trying to learn something like how to get a swing feel or play a bit more expressively with the rhythm, use some rubato, picking up on some rhythmic elements of the musical language by copying, which is going to help you develop your own musical instincts. And you can do stuff more passively too, so even just tapping along when you're listening to songs, you can try and make up your own rhythms, copy what the drummer's doing, even just practicing trying to keep the pulse along with the track. Counting along is good too. Stuff like this I found to be helpful because it's kind of fun and you can practice and you can get used to some more complicated things just a bit more naturally without overthinking it. This one is a really important one and something you want to do fairly regularly when you get to a certain point with your songs and pieces and exercises. Once you've got familiar playing something, you should spend some time practicing it to a metronome. If you're not sure, a metronome gives us some even clicks or beeps at a tempo that we set. Metronomes can look like this. Often people use apps on their phone these days. I've started using a vibrating one recently. A metronome gives us that perfectly even grid to work against, so it keeps us on track, and it's really a staple practice method, practice tool that all musicians use. And with enough practice, it really does help you get your rhythm and your timing much more precise. It's also good because we also have to learn to keep listening to something else and sync up with it, but that is tricky to do if you've not used one before, so I'm going to do some videos on how to start using a metronome soon. With a watch like this though, because you can feel the vibrations, it's going to be a little bit more helpful for beginners in terms of actually being able to keep your focus on the metronome. This one is a smartwatch too, and if you do want to check it out, there is a link below and a discount code. We don't want to end up playing things robotically, and playing things more metronomically isn't always the best approach, but when you practice them like that, you develop the control to then be expressive with it afterwards. So you can play your actual songs and pieces to a metronome. It's really good with scales and things like that. And a lot of people use the Hanon exercises. If you practice them correctly with good technique and stuff, they can be really helpful for improving your timing and developing your speed. I'll put a link to the Hanon book below as well, that's really popular. And similarly, playing along with backing tracks and other musicians if you can is also really good practice. Playing piano is a mental and physical skill, and we kind of need to get them connected. So we need to have the rhythm in our head, but then we do also need to have the technical facility to actually perform it. And that's always going to be a little bit different depending on what you're actually playing. So my point is that you really just need to focus on the technique specific to what you're learning so that you can keep in good enough control to play the rhythm accurately. And this is part of the reason why it's normally not a good idea to play too difficult material when you're a beginner. It's better when you play simpler stuff and perform it better, and then you learn to develop that technique and control slowly and build it up, and then you can get to the point where you can actually pull off the harder material without it sounding sloppy in terms of the rhythm. And a very general tip, but it's the main aim to keep in mind, we want to keep loose and relaxed as we move around, because otherwise, if we're tense and we're jerky as we move, we're going to hear that come out in the rhythm. So we learn simple material to start with so we can learn to play whilst keeping relaxed. Even with just the right hand to start with, trying out some basic improvisation is another way to get rhythms to come out more musically and intuitively. You can try out simple stuff and then move on to trickier things, usually more naturally without blocking your mind, overanalyzing what you're doing. I quite often think about the rhythm first when coming up with a phrase in the moment, and then that's my guide and I find notes to put to it. Just a couple of quick tips to finish off then. When you're playing, try and move a little bit with the motion of the music. Depending on the feel of the music, it may be swaying, maybe tapping your foot, maybe nodding your head. But this really helps you latch onto the rhythm and commit to it, keep the time going, and it's kind of like you're being your own conductor, your own guide for what you play. And lastly, whilst we can practice our rhythm on all our pieces we're learning, on our exercises and stuff, a great way to practice rhythm is by playing simple accompaniment patterns, learning different chord patterns. With those rhythms actually the main focus of what the piano's role is. And you can check out this video next with 5 must-know accompaniment patterns for beginners. Thanks for watching.